Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site that covers Arizona Cardinals. With me recording on a Tuesday night post-Super Bowl is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, and also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. Perfect time, as I'm going to say right now, perfect time to get on the podcast if you haven't there. And yes, you can hear that my voice is a little bit scratchy, a little bit out of character, but no, I'm feeling fine. It's just my voice is just being bonkers right now, Seth. And we've got Super Bowl champions. We're getting the best of the world right now. The San Francisco 49ers lose the Super Bowl. It looks like things are getting a little unhinged, but my goodness. Episode 515, we're going to talk Super Bowl. We're going to talk about Super Bowl odds for next year and a former Cardinal that suddenly is going to be available if the Cardinals want him. Seth, how happy are you to see the San Francisco 49ers lose and things start to get a little bit unglued?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how quickly it all happened, right? Like you have a team that was in the Super Bowl, the favorites. You know, a lot of people made fun of them, and I didn't realize. I mean, obviously, we're Cardinals fans, but I didn't realize how many people outside of San Francisco and even outside the NFC West truly did not like the 49ers, and the joy that they've gotten from this specific team losing is insane to me, because you have a team that, I mean, from the outside, they're annoying, but they didn't seem completely unlikable, right? Like they're coming off now, and now you're seeing it. And you're like, oh, no wonder nobody likes these guys. And everybody was kind of, even though they were begrudgingly rooting for Kansas City, you kind of see now why everybody's like, oh, it's fine that KC won again. Because it's just, I mean, the Niners are just like really unlikable, and it's just an interesting juxtaposition to see that playing out in real time. I mean, for those that don't know what we're talking about, starting guard John Feliciano of the San Francisco 49ers took to Twitter or X or whatever they call it now to defend or stand up for his teammate Colton McKivitz. McKivitz was getting a lot of blame from you know, media that, and quite frankly, there's a reason Jess and I don't screen record and send out plays. And the reason why is because a lot of times you just don't know the assignment. Like, you can have an idea of what you think is supposed to go on, but sometimes you just don't know the assignment. And a lot of people blamed McKivitz for the third and goal play in overtime, where they just decided not to block Chris Jones, the best defensive player in the game. And interesting strategy. I mean, that's a bold strategy, but no, Feliciano wanted everybody to know it was definitely not McKivitz's fault. So that leaves one person on that side at right guard, and that was the injury replacement for Feliciano, Spencer Buford, who came to his own defense of, damn, dude, I just was logging on Twitter and see this. and now, you know, Feliciano's apologizing because, you know, he was drunk and hungover, and you know, he didn't mean it. and
Except he did. You don't
And
say that stuff. You don't accidentally. Like, you
right.
might accidentally say what you're thinking, but you don't accidentally think that. That's
Yeah.
the thing. It's like, no, he's
And
apologizing that he said it publicly. That's all.
yeah, and then you have Brandon Ayuk's brother that's saying things like, this is the exact reason why we leave in San Francisco. Thank you, 49ers, for drafting my brother. We are forever grateful. Why does your all-pro 1,300-yard receiver have 3 catches in the Super Bowl? Yeah, it's an interesting fall quickly, right? Like, you know, obviously the Cardinals lost the Super Bowl really before Twitter was even a thing. I think it was
2009 was when Twitter began, and they lost that Super Bowl in February of 2009. So no one was tweeting anything back then.
And we've seen fans and media take to Twitter to really kind of go off, but we've never seen, at least that I remember, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we've really never seen a team have some of these breakdowns that we're seeing from San Francisco. And my buddy Kyle Posey, who runs Niners Nation, even after the what did they have today? My goodness. The press conference, thank you, that the 49ers had, where Kyle Shanahan was asked whether Steve Wilkes will be back. His response was, I expect all our coaches to be back. And Kyle kind of put it succinctly. He said, that's real. I can't guarantee that anybody in the world will be alive on Sunday. like, yeah, I expect all our coaches to be back. I haven't thought about it because I'm still pissed off that I blew another 10-point lead in the Super Bowl.
So isn't it great though? Like, these storylines continue. Like, one,
right.
Don't bet against Patrick Mahomes. Okay, we've been saying it, and so why? It didn't make any sense. I got why San Francisco was favored, but for crying out loud, Kyle Shanahan, he was the author, he was the protagonist of the 28-3 debacle in the Super Bowl with the Falcons as offensive coordinator when Tom Brady brought the Patriots all the way back and beat the Falcons in overtime. He was the head coach of the 49ers when they had a 20-10 lead entering the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl 4 years ago, and they lost, and they got outscored 21-0 in that fourth quarter. They had a 10-point lead this time, and they gave it up. But, granted, it was I will say this, and going into that halftime, when they finally got some points on the board at Kansas City, I'm like, San Francisco was outplaying them by a lot. And the fact that Kansas City was a score away, I'm like, this is bad for San Francisco. Kansas City is not a team that you can let hang around because of the way they play defense. They're going to come back. They're going to figure things out. And totally that's what happened.
By the way, Jess, I think you and I both need to brag a little bit. We did. You only missed one thing, but we hit the money line. We hit obviously the against the spread, and I was lucky enough to get the hook on the under. You were unlucky enough to get the hook on the over, but man, we pretty much called that as you needed to, and that's what's crazy to me is you look at this game and there were highs and lows for both teams, obviously, but I thought the thing that stood out was it's not that Brock Purdy can't win you a Super Bowl or be the quarterback of a team that wins a Super Bowl. It's that he can't win you a Super Bowl, if that kind of makes sense. Like, when you look at the juxtaposition of Patrick Mahomes willed his team to the Super Bowl and Brock Purdy was fine. I mean,
Yeah. Well,
any
you look about this, like,
I mean,
yeah. Well,
any
you look about this, like, as a quarterback, you've got to get your guys in position to make plays. Their stars didn't make plays. I mean, Christian McCaffrey was fantastic. Brandon Ayuk didn't do anything. George Kittle was invisible. And so it was the Juwan Jennings show, which, by the way, um, I said, take the over on his.
Yep.
Apparently Seth made a little bit of money on Juwan Jennings and Marquez Scantling. That's fantastic. But and then on defense, and they lost guys. Guys got hurt. I will say this. The 49ers came out because I felt like the 49ers defense had looked very vulnerable over the last month and a half. And the kind of like, and we know that when the Cardinals put up their rushing numbers that they did, it was when they didn't have Javon Hargrave and they didn't have Eric Armstead playing that game. And so when they get rushed for 200 yards, that made sense. But they hadn't been good against the run since then. And I was worried about them. I mean, I thought that was going to be a major problem. And they came out and their defense against Patrick Mahomes and against that rushing attack, Isaiah Pacheco, was absolutely stellar. It was stellar early on. And they petered out. I mean, obviously they lost Drake Greenlaw. Oh, awful injury. Those non-contact injuries. Like he literally popped his Achilles just running on the field. That was terrible.
Yeah, and that's one of those that, again, we're not fans of the 49ers. We weren't on the Brock Purdy train. We had a podcast about this whole thing, but the last thing we want to see is a guy go down, especially a guy go down, that's as good as Drake Greenlaw, but also like the way he did, like you said, like literally just running on the field. Like it's just such a sad way to go out. And it's interesting because I wanted to get your opinion. You and I have heard ad nauseum, for right or wrong. Right? I don't know if I have an opinion, but about the turf conditions in the field at State Farm Stadium, especially in the Super Bowl last year, when the Cardinals weren't even in charge of the grass, but that's neither here nor there. But it's interesting that that field had all those issues, and you still see, and then you see a guy go down on a non-contact injury on the sideline, and we didn't have the same negative outcry energy that we had with the Cardinals. Now, I'm not going to say that's what happened because, it could have just been one of those situations. I mean, I can tell you when I blew out my ankle in August, and when I did it, I was at the park with running drills with kids. Like it just, sometimes it happens, but, and obviously, Dre Greenlaw is a, much better athlete than me. But it's crazy to see that happen just in that moment, in that situation. And they're not to be, and I'm not saying that I expect there to be, this ungodly backlash, but it's interesting that there was basically no backlash, right? It was just kind of like, oh, it was a non-contact injury. It happens, whatever. And especially after we've had to listen for years about the turf at State Farm Stadium.
Yeah, I do think, like, and from what I heard from, saw from reporters and things like that, is that the turf at Allegiant Stadium was getting high marks. And yeah, again, the league handles the grass. The Super Bowl, the teams don't. And apparently last year's was overwatered, and so was softer and wetter and a little bit whatever, but neither here nor there.
But yeah, I mean, to look at it, and you and I talked about it off the air, and it's, it's kind of it's interesting how how life works, right? Like you and I have a conversation on Thursday, or I guess it was last Tuesday, technically. No, it was last Thursday, where we discussed, some free agents to be on each side of on each team. And we mentioned Oren Burks, and, he's kind of the third linebacker in that linebacker room. He's obviously just like, he's not a bad player, but he's obviously, and this isn't hindsight, it's just he is not anywhere near, Fred Warner or Drake Greenlaw.
Right. He's the other linebacker. He's the other, like all those years, like when you had the 49ers and the Seahawks, you've always had, you're like Bobby Wagner, KJ Wright, and who's the other guy? And the same thing with the 49ers. You got Fred Warner, Drake Greenlaw, and then who's the other guy? That other guy's Oren Burks this year. And after Greenlaw's injury, you have the numbers. It was unfair what Mahomes did to Burks on the field.
And it was unfortunate, because again, Oren Burks can't control that. Like he's not these guys, right? He's not Greenlaw. He's not Fred Warner, but 9 catches allowed on 9 targets with a touchdown. During the playoff run, what you saw was what makes Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and Travis Kelce, obviously, but Marquez Valdez-Scantling was the one that caught the touchdown on Burks. And that's the thing that people don't get is, a lot of it was Kelce, but the 49ers, and specifically Steve Wilks, they put a lot on their linebackers. They allow them to run with wide receivers from the slot because, well, quite frankly, they can. They're good enough to do it. And the problem, and my buddy, who's a huge 49ers fan and was here watching the game here, and that was his biggest lament or complaint about the whole situation was, why are you staying in the same defense when you have Oren Burks on the field and not Drake Greenlaw anymore? And what makes Patrick Mahomes special? There's a lot of things, but we're being able to work with Andy Reid and really, take advantage of situations like that is just, it's just crazy to see a duo play at that magnitude and be that good. And they really are. I mean, they're kind of unheard of and unmatched from anything we've ever seen, because as great as Belichick and Brady were or are, or however you want to phrase it, Belichick wasn't calling the offense. And to see, Reid and Mahomes together and what they've done and the career arc that Mahomes is on, especially now. I mean, 3 Super Bowls already, man. That's in 7 seasons. That's just, it's unheard of. And as Cardinals fans, we can lament a lot of things, but it's crazy to see the NFL go from Tom Brady to Patrick Mahomes in the same century. I mean, like, it's almost like there's they didn't skip a beat, and these guys, like 10 Super Bowls between these two guys in this century is just absurd.
Yeah, and I'll point this out again. Last year, before last year's Super Bowl between the Eagles and the Chiefs, I did a short podcast and I wrote about it as well, about kind of some Cardinals connections. And after the Super Bowl win for the Chiefs, I pointed out how this third Chiefs championship brings up 3 big what ifs for the Cardinals, and it's threefold. Because if we go back in time, now obviously we're not going to but I'll basically sum it as this: they should have had Andy Reid, they could have had Patrick Mahomes, and they should have had Chris Jones, in that order. Because the Chiefs they basically stole Andy Reid away from the Cardinals, interviewing him at the airport where he was waiting to fly to Arizona to take the job here after Ken Whisenhunt was fired. The Cardinals were sitting in 2017. Then we go to Chris Jones. Chris Jones. When we talked about that draft, like Chris Jones was a big question mark because of character / off the field stuff. But the Cardinals ended up going with a big time talent at defensive tackle, also with character and off the field issues, and passed on Chris Jones, electing to select Robert Nkemdiche when the number 29, when 8 picks later, the Chiefs picked Chris Jones. They could have had Chris Jones on their defense. And then the very next year in 2017, when the Cardinals had the 13th pick, the Chiefs swooped up and traded all the way up to number 10 to draft Patrick Mahomes. Number of reasons. The Cardinals thought they were going to get Mahomes or Deshaun Watson. And Patrick Mahomes knew that the Cardinals were going to draft him if he was available, and basically told the Chiefs if they want him, because he wanted to work with Andy Reid and the Chiefs, that they'd have to trade up, and they did it. And so the Cardinals, there's big 3 what ifs, is that this Chiefs team, like their biggest kind of things to that, like 2 of their biggest players, if you look at Mahomes, Kelsey, and Chris Jones, the Cardinals viably, if we in another parallel universe, in that multiverse, there is a version of the Cardinals where Andy Reid is the head coach, Patrick Mahomes is the quarterback, and Chris Jones is wrecking opposing offenses for the Cardinals. Now, I don't know if the same results would happen, but it's not just another what if in Cardinals lore as we see other teams find success. Now, the overtime period. If we remember the playoffs a couple years ago, that Bills and Chiefs game, when everyone was so mad that the rule was in place, and it's the rule that's been in place in the regular season for a long time, is that both teams, like a touchdown in overtime ends it, like by the first team, and it used to be. Like years ago, if you all remember.
the first score.
Yes, it was just sudden death, period. Then they made it, okay, if it'll only be sudden death if the first team scores a touchdown. And then, because everyone thought that, the Bills, that fantastic Bills-Chiefs game that was back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and the Chiefs won the toss, they went down and scored a touchdown that ended it. They made it so that for the playoffs, that guaranteed both teams would get the ball. And this is the first time since that rule came in that there was an overtime game in the playoffs. And so when the official explained, we have a new ball game, both teams will have a chance to possess the ball no matter what happens. San Francisco wins the toss. They choose to receive. And Kansas City seemed well prepared. And after the game, Kyle Juszczyk talked about how we didn't know, we didn't know the rules. Kansas City guys are saying, Chris Jones is like, we practiced that for 2 weeks. We practiced all through the playoffs. After all, they're saying they created that rule because of us. And so they were always going to, even if they won the toss, they were going to take the ball second, and they would have gone down. Had San Francisco scored a touchdown on their first possession, they were going to go for 2 for the win. And so that would have been a fantastic ending. Kyle Shanahan later.
And they probably would have run the play that they scored the game-winning touchdown on.
Probably. And that would have been, oh my gosh, that was so heartbreaking. Now the one thing I will say, watching the game live, in my house with my family, so I got the concept. But the one thing that I wasn't sure of, and I questioned it, was like at the end of the overtime period, that 15-minute period, Kansas City seemed to be not worried about the clock at all. And I thought that had the time expired while they were still on their first possession, then the game would have been over because they did have a chance to possess the ball. Turns out That wasn't the case, and that's why. But when it was getting down to 12 seconds, everyone was watching. What are you doing? Why aren't you getting? No, it's because. And I looked up the rule later. It said if the period ends while the second team was still possessing the ball, then it would just go to the next quarter. They would have had a 2-minute break, and it would just been like a next new quarter. And Tony Romo made mention of that, but the telecast didn't make it super clear. But everyone who's watching the game is like, "What are you doing? Time's running out." And it didn't matter. They scored a touchdown anyway. La-di-da, they win. Did you feel like overtime was mishandled by either coach?
You and I talked a little bit about it off the air, and the thing that I've come away from this is that and I didn't have a problem with anything that happened. But when you say, or when your thought process is, we wanted the third possession, what that's telling me is that you're assuming that the other team is going to score. And to be fair, I mean, you and I both agree. I mean, we've lauded Patrick Mahomes' entire podcast. That's a fair, safe assumption. I mean, that's probably a good assumption from their perspective. However, I think that's where the calculation for me didn't compute, because if you take the ball first and then you come to the realization, or you're stating that, oh, we're going to play for the third possession, you're saying that if we score either a field goal or a touchdown, we are not going to get the stop that we need. So we want that third possession. Well, if that is your case, or if that's your belief, however you want to state it, then why are you not being ultra aggressive and going for it on fourth down inside your own 10, or inside the Chiefs 10, excuse me, if that's what if you're playing for, if you're saying, hey, we know that we're not going to stop them, then why even give them a chance to beat you? Because you're already saying, and I get that the Chiefs could have scored and would have gone for 2, like you just stated. But if you score, they have to go for 2 to win the game. If you kick a field goal, if they score like they did, it's completely over. Whereas they're immediately in. If you go for it, obviously convert and score. They're immediately in, oh, we have to score. We don't have an option. So we have to play this as though we have to score a touchdown. That was just the only thing I didn't get. And I know people will say, well,
here's the thing that people don't realize about Kyle Shanahan. He's one of the most conservative coaches in the league. Like, he's innovative, but he is not his father. In fact, when they went for it on fourth down in regulation and got the touchdown, I was floored. I was certain they were going to kick the field goal there, because Kyle Shanahan is extremely conservative. When you look at across the board, 2-point conversions. Do you realize that the 2 of the teams that attempted the fewest 2-point conversions in 2023 were the 49ers and the Chiefs? I believe, I was looking up the numbers, I don't think the Chiefs did a 2-point conversion all year.
Right, and that's what I'm saying is, like, I get exactly what you're saying, right? That that's not your identity, that's not who you are. But I just don't understand the thought process of, we wanted the third, like, I don't get that.
I get it, because, like, if there is a third possession, we want to be the ones to have it.
And I do understand that, but I would think that at that point that you're playing more aggressively, because you're going to force them to to have to go for two in that situation. Obviously, you don't know that they're going to go for two, but you're saying like, hey, they're going to have to, score to tie us. We're not going to, because that's the other thing is like, when you get that ball, even after the 3, you understand that you're only playing for, from the 25, you're really only playing for about 40 yards, not even with how well Harrison Butker's kicked the ball, right? Maybe 35. And so you're saying to yourself, we trust that our defense will stop Patrick Mahomes and give up, only 35 yards. Well, if you look at it, in the third and fourth quarter, they had the interception that started the quarter. Then they had the punt. And then from there, it was 47. They did only go 8. Touchdown, 69 field goals, 64 field goals, 75 touchdown. Like, it was kind of academic for them. Yeah. And the Niners, to concede that they were going to give up, or, that the Chiefs were going to score no matter what. And I get that philosophy. I truly do. Like, I'm not trying to say anything, but to say that, oh, we're not going to stop them because, so we want that third possession. It just, I think you have to change your mentality at that point, on how you're trying to run that game.
Yeah. If we want to bring it back to like the cold quarterback thing, because there's a lot of NFL players, like former and current NFL players who are, and I feel bad for Brock Purdy because he's so polarizing. Like, I can't imagine. I don't know if we've seen another player get talked about so much by other players than Brock Purdy has. But if you look at it, and it is what it is. Like, we're not saying that he's bad and he's not great, but you look at the 49ers, Purdy could not help the 49ers overcome their miscues, the blocked extra point by Jake Moody, and then the muffed punt. Ultimately, the game went to overtime because of those. But he couldn't overcome that. Patrick Mahomes, when he threw an interception, Isaiah Pacheco fumbled in the red zone. He overcame that and led the team to willed himself. Like, you saw him making plays with his legs. And you're like, how did the 49ers not figure this out? Like, he's not much of a runner, but when it's crunch time, guess what he does? He's seen it a lot. He uses his legs. And they just didn't do it. I wanted to point out a couple of bad beats that happened for me. I went with rather just the straight money line. I went with the alternate spread for the Chiefs, and I went -3 because of the. So I ended up with the push. Now I knew that that they don't kick the extra point in on a game-winning score in overtime because it's done, but. That was just, I could have gone with the -2.5, and I just had to go -3, and I ended up with the push there. But here's my worst one. And it was, I had Brock Purdy over 12.5, and you know what he had? He had 13 until the kneel down. He had 13 until the kneel down to end regulation, and then he didn't run the ball again. So
yeah, that was a terrible beat. That was a terrible beat. That was a bad one. I thought all the Kittle bets were tough. I mean, those aren't bad beats, but man, that was rough to watch. I mean, you're talking about one of the most important players in the game to only have 2 catches for 4 yards. I thought, obviously we nailed the Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Jawan Jennings, Justin Watson, Noah Gray, Kyle
Juszczyk, yes.
Yeah. First play of the game, man. I mean, nice to get that out of the way quickly. And then I think we needed to hit our other ones. I mean, we talked about Eric Armstead, Javon Hargrave, and George Karlaftis, and all those guys hit their marks as well. There's a reason we told you to stay away from Nick Bosa. He was fantastic. but no sacks. So that made his
Pacheco hurt me. Well, because the San Francisco's run defense was so good. I had Pacheco on the over and then laddered him to 70.
Well, the funny thing is, I took the same bet, but I also had Mahomes. I took his alternate line at 25, and I thought about betting it to 40. I was like, and I just couldn't pull the trigger. That one was obviously hindsight, and then the other one was Justin Watson. Man, I said he was going to be that kind of guy to get those check down targets. I didn't expect that big, long 25-yard gain, but if I would have taken his 25-yard, it was like I think it was like plus 200. Those two alone would have been, just a massive day, but you get nervous with those ones.
I was a Pacheco touchdown because I parlayed. It was one that was already set up on DraftKings, and it was Chiefs win, Kelsey over 40 yards, and Pacheco touchdown. I'm like, oh, easy. And then Pacheco never scored. Come on. He scored a touchdown in 7 straight games.
Weren't you super nervous though after the first half of Travis Kelce?
I'm like, I thought, oh man, I wasn't going to any of that, but like overtime period, I'm like, perfect. No, let's get. I also threw a flyer in there for because Jerick McKinnon was activated. I was like, plus 600 anytime touchdown. I'll take that. And then because we've seen him before. No, that was. But I was a bad beat. I broke even. Like I just can't admit I had a couple of nice wins, but then I ended up breaking even because I made a couple of just dinky little things that didn't make though. I was that bad beat on Brock Purdy's kneel down, and then an Isaac Pacheco touchdown from having a really good Sunday.
Yeah, and I got I was lucky. I threw a flyer on that Juwan Jennings, Marquez Valdez-Scantling touchdown parlay. And then it was funny because I in-played in the fourth quarter, I think in the third quarter actually, but I actually in-played Juwan Jennings again as an anytime touchdown scorer because I was just kind of doubling down on it. Like, if it happens, it happens. And so, and then, the in-plays were what really did well for me. Obviously that touchdown parlay really helped, but I actually in-played Travis Kelce and Rashid Rice over 50 yards receiving in the fourth quarter together because they were obviously, I knew that Kansas City was going to have to throw the ball at that point. And so I got really good odds. It was kind of weird to get the odds I was able to get at plus 550 because it doesn't seem accurate, but sometimes the books make odd decisions and you can take advantage of them. And I did that. But yeah, I mean, overall, I thought there was a lot of the betting wasn't great. And that's because the first half of the game was so bad.
Yeah.
It was a really poorly sloppily played game. And I know people will say, well, it was just good defenses. No, it really wasn't a lot of the time, man.
Christian McCaffrey fumbled, Isaiah Pacheco fumbled.
And they weren't even good plays. They were, there were simple plays of why are you not going into traffic with 2 arms on the ball? That's something we teach our 12-year-old football players. Hey, if you're running into contact, you got to get both hands on the football. You can't run into it with just one arm. And to see 2 of the better runners in the NFL make the same mistake in the game, obviously they canceled each other out basically, but that was a little different. And then I felt really bad for Ray McLeod and the guy that hit, the lucky bounce of Tommy Townsend.
And the thing is, Ray McLeod, he's going to get some grief. Everyone reacted well, why did you go for the ball? He knew why he was going for the ball. He told his cover guys, get out of the way. And the rookie Darrell Luter didn't. he didn't get out. He didn't clear out. And
I will say the one thing that McLeod did that we, again, and this is with more of the high school kids, because we tend to try not to return punts, even if teams do punt for that specific reason, because it's not the punt returner you worry about. It's everybody else. It was interesting because I was talking to a high school kid that was at the house. He played for Hamilton. He's going to Illinois State, and he returned punts, and it's like, I get the desire to pick up the ball, but just fall on it, man. Like, don't try to make a play at that point. Just fall down. Like, just fall on top of the ball and possess the ball at that point. And it's unfortunate sometimes these guys, like you said, Darrell Luter, Ray McLeod, like, these guys become the goats of the game, and not the positive, but the negative goats of the game.
The scapegoat, not the acronym goats.
Yeah. And that was unfortunate that it just happened to fall on two guys that played a big outcome in the game without really having much to do with the game itself.
Coming up next on the Rise of Secret podcast, the best of our Cardinals talking. We've got a couple of the talk about next up. 2024 Super Bowl 59 odds are already out. Where do the Cardinals sit? What do we think of it? That's coming up next on Rise of Secret. We're back on the Rise of Secret podcast, best of our Cardinals talk on the web. Super Bowl 59 odds immediately released after the result of the Super Bowl. And, I mean, the Cardinals are long shots, but it looks a little better, doesn't it? They're not the longest shots. There are many teams with longer odds than they do now. Like, I don't think there's any question about why the teams who are at the top. The 49ers are the favorite at plus 500, Chiefs at plus 750, Ravens at plus 850. Those are basically your favorites. Then you get into the contenders. You got Bills and Lions at plus 1,200. This is on BetMGM, of course. Bengals at plus 14, Cowboys and Eagles plus 16, and then the Dolphins at plus 2,000. And so those are basically your competitors, and you get into the dark horse teams. And the Cardinals are all the way down at plus 8,000 or 80-1 odds to win next year's Super Bowl. But I found it, there are two major takeaways for me just on seeing those odds. Is one, there are 6 teams that have longer odds. If we remember this time a year ago, they had the longest odds, or were tied with the longest odds with the Texans, or maybe some sports books had the Texans with slightly longer odds. But the Cardinals were viewed universally as the worst team going into 2023. And now they're just viewed as a just a long shot, just a run-of-the-mill long shot. You've got the Broncos, Patriots, Giants, Titans, Commanders, and Panthers, which all have longer odds. But interestingly, you look at the teams that they are tied with in terms of odds at plus 8,000. Raiders, Steelers, and Seahawks. That one's funny to me.
Not overly surprising on the Seahawks with the new coaching staff and all of that. And I think it was interesting that they ended up not being able to get Chip Kelly as their OC. Not sure what happened. Chip decided he wanted to stay in college but not recruit as hard, so now he's the offensive coordinator at Ohio State, right? So that should be interesting. But yeah, I mean, it's always a little more when the unknown. And so, like, a lot of those teams, like you mentioned, they make sense because you're just it's kind of unknown. Ryan Grubb's an interesting one because obviously never been an OC at the NFL level. And so we'll see how that works out for them. I'm interested to see what their plan is, really. I mean, obviously Mike McDonald is a fantastic coach, but you just brought in a guy that has basically never been the OC of a big time program, even like because Kalen DeBoer was always technically like the play caller. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out for them. The other ones, I mean, I don't think it's overly surprising. Do you? Like the Commanders,
No.
kind of the same boat, and their rosters kind of garbage, and their owners kind of weird right now. Like, so to see all this, the Panthers are in an interesting spot. The Titans, I honestly think that they could be really bad. Obviously, like we said, the Panthers are an unknown, but I think the Titans could be really, really bad, man.
Yeah. I will say this. I mean, I do. Maybe I should take slightly more offense at the odds the Cardinals have, because if you look at all three teams, the Raiders, Steelers, and the Seahawks, what are they all? What is kind of the common thing that all three have? Uncertainty about the quarterback position, right?
Yeah.
The Cardinals don't have uncertainty about the quarterback position. They have uncertainty about other things, but you're putting like a team that you know who their quarterback is. You're putting them in the same boat as the Raiders, who you're like, Aiden O'Connell. Steelers, who are like, Kenny Pickett. And the Seahawks,
Right.
like, are we going to roll with Geno Smith this year? And so, like, in that sense, you look at it, you're like, wait a minute. Why? Why are they looped in the same teams as them when you could see them, and maybe it's because of the talent, the rest of the talent on the roster, but it might make more sense to put them like I make the plus 7,500 or plus 7,000 to make
Well,
it.
let me ask you this: the Falcons, the Colts, the Seahawks, and the Saints, and then you mentioned the other teams. Why are the Cardinals not in that tier? Let's say. Like I don't understand why the Falcons are above them. I don't.
They do so. They're like they're a quarterback away from being good, right? That's how I viewed them last year.
I agree, but what's their avenue to get a quarterback? That's kind of my question.
True.
And then Raheem Morris has never had any success as an NFL coach. So as an NFL head coach, sorry, he's been a good defense coordinator. And then to that extent, like the Colts, we're both big Anthony Richardson fans. We think he's a good player, but I think he only played 3 games, right? Like, like, and I know they went 9-8 with Gardner Minshew, but they lost 2 winnable games in the last 3 that would have guaranteed them a playoff spot, and in fact they were kind of beat down in those games. So it's always interesting to see how this all kind of comes out in the wash. The big thing is, and what I like to do is, you mentioned it, you take this now. So the initial reaction before any roster moves are made, before anything happens, at plus 8,000, and you have to look at that and you say, hey, there are 6 teams that are worse than the Cardinals going into this year, and there's 4 others that are the same or the equivalent of them. That puts them as a fringe top 20 team going into the offseason, which, like you said, this time last year, universally one of the worst 2 teams in the NFL.
So everyone's saying, like, are the Cardinals going to win a game? They're going to sit Kyler Murray the whole year. They're hiring this new head coach. He's going to get fired after one. Like, everyone thought, like, and in fairness, for most of the year, the Cardinals were as bad as, at least record-wise, were as bad as everyone thought they were going to be.
Yeah, and I mean, and there's nothing to hang your hat on. I want people to understand that. Like, we are very excited about what the future holds, but at the same time, what happened this year is only a building block or a step, and if they don't take that step next year, then this year was obviously I don't want to say fool's gold, but it was basically, we shouldn't have gotten excited about it, right? Like we got excited about nothing. And so that is the interesting thing, is you look at and you say, hey, the odds not great, obviously. But it's good to see them in a higher position heading into this year before even the offseason starts, because hopefully that number changes. And I'll tell you this, if they go in as 19 or above, that's a huge win.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about 13, 14 spots for a team that was kind of scoffed at, and there was a lot of questions about their overall future heading into this season.
Yeah, and I will mention briefly the MVP odds. Kyler Murray in the same boat as Justin Fields, although I don't necessarily agree with that. Kyler Murray at plus 5,000. You know, if you want like that range, not because I think Kyler Murray will be the MVP, but if there's a player in that, if you look at the players in that range of odds, Kyler Murray at 50-1, throw a few bucks on that, because we have seen Kyler has an MVP ceiling. We've seen him play at that level. And, the offense, like we said, it's close. They're a great number one receiver away from having a very good offense. And
what's really interesting to me isn't the plus 5,000. I think that's a fair area. And like you said, where he's at is fair. What's interesting to me isn't even Justin Fields. Like, you get him on the right team, yada, yada, yada. Anthony Richardson being plus 4,000.
He's plus 3,500 on BetMGM. What the heck?
Like, that's a baffling, again, big fans of Anthony Richardson, but we're talking about a guy that played 4 games, completed less than 60% of his passes, had 3 passing touchdowns in 4 games, and a quarterback rating of below 90. Like, it's not like we're talking about a guy that was lighting the NFL world on fire offensively. And so, we'll see how that comes along. Like I said, the rest of them I don't even care about. Like, I genuinely, like, all those guys are playing on a better team, or should have those odds because they had a better overall season than Kyler. But man, to see that's the one I truly don't get, where I'm like, it's an interesting one.
Throw $5 to $20 on those Kyler odds. I think that at least where he's at, because of what we believe what we saw at the end of last season, what we believe the Cardinals are going to do in the offseason. I think at plus 5,000, even though most guys, that's a stupid, like, anytime you get odds that long, like, why bother? But that one's worth, like, throw $5 on that, and you're not going to miss. You're not going to miss $5. One, and the potential payout is certainly worth it.
Right.
Coming up next on the Rise of Sierra podcast, best of Cardinals talk on the web, we will talk one little off-season thing, and that is a former Cardinal. Is there trouble in Philly? Because Haason Reddick apparently is available for the Cardinals to trade for if they want. That's coming next on Rise of Sea Red. We're back on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, best of Cardinals talk on the web. Suddenly over the Super Bowl weekend, we got a report that the Philadelphia Eagles have granted Haason Reddick permission to seek a trade. That's news. We didn't know that Haason Reddick wanted to trade. The fact of the matter is, he didn't ask for a trade. He wants a contract extension. He's entering year 3 of his 3-year, $45 million contract. He has no guarantees left on his deal. He's got $14.25 million due in salary. There's a $1 million roster bonus due in March, and he's going to turn 30 years old. Now, you cannot question the production he's had. 4 straight double-digit sack years. He had 11 sacks last year. He had 16 for the Eagles the year before. Haason Reddick, the big-time pass rusher, going to be available. He wants to sign an extension and stay in Philadelphia, but we know how the business works, right? Should the Cardinals make a call to Philadelphia? And after all, Cardinals do have a connection. Jonathan Gannon was his defensive coordinator. It was when he had his career-high 16 sacks. Nick Rawlis was his linebackers coach. So he'd make and he plays a position of absolute need for the Cardinals because they'd have no pass rushing juice. If we recall, they had 1 sack over the final 6 games, and that wasn't actually a sack. That was running out of the bounds by Justin Fields for no gain when Dennis Gardeck was 2 yards in front of him. So he definitely would help. First off, would you go after him? And 2, why would you or why would you not?
It's one of those situations where obviously in the short term, I think it would be an ideal, reunion. I'm not sure what his situation is with Arizona in general, like if he would be okay with that, or, since Steve Keim is gone, if he would be, more apt to coming back. That being said, here's the bugaboo on this. 30 years old, man. He'll be 30 years old on September 22nd this year.
Yeah, and we 2 years ago, remember when he signed the deal for Philadelphia? We knew, you knew, that the Cardinals wanted to bring him back. Philadelphia's money plus
him being from there, yeah.
It was too much. There was no way the Cardinals were going to go over that. But that 2 years ago, he's only 2 years older, right?
Yeah, and so he is, out. This is his last year on that 3-year, $45 million deal. He's a free agent after this year. They save
$1.2 million. They don't save any money.
Yeah, they basically save nothing. I'm assuming with the contract, they're probably going to expect a day 2 pick, not the contract, with how old he is, a day 2 pick. But if Reddick is truly saying hey, I want to be extended, and he's earned probably in the realm of $20 million a year, and we're seeing defenders get paid that at 30 years old now. Do you want to pay Haason Reddick a 3-year, $60 million contract? That's real. And I'm not saying that's what he's asking for or anything like that, but that's the question you have to ask. Is that what you want to do?
And if y'all remember, if we go back to 2 years ago in the offseason, when we talked about his deal, we said that 3-year, $45 million was really kind of the perfect deal. I would have loved to see the Cardinals pay him that much because we talked about Haason. We've been talking about Haason Reddick since before the draft, since before he was drafted by the Cardinals in 2017, and before he turned out to be a good pass rusher, we knew he was undersized, and the fact that he's had the success he had is because of his elite athleticism. But we have always kind of felt that after probably not going to happen this year, but after this year, when he hits that age 31 season, his elite get-off is going to lose just a little bit, and he's not going to be special as a pass rusher. Now, we can't question his hunger. He plays hungry. He plays with a motor. But the second you take that absolute best first step and he becomes an ordinary pass rusher, he's a liability on the field because he can't do some of those other things because of his size. Would he be great for the Cardinals this year? Absolutely. The question is, would he be worth it? And at age 31 and 32, And and we always felt like after age 30, that's why we thought this was the perfect contract for the Eagles, is because after this year, at age 30, it's going to be really hard to rely on someone whose success is pure athleticism. Athleticism plus motor, but is he going to be like, he'll be a more athletic Marcus Golden, but not as big.
Yeah, and it's just to the point now where you're talking about a guy who, it has the last 4 years put up, insane numbers. I mean, we have to acknowledge the 50 the 50 and a half sacks or whatever, right around there, that he's had over the last 4 years. Like he is a legitimate 13 sack a year guy over the last 4 years.
And hasn't missed a game in the last, he's never missed a game.
Never been injured. And yes, we can lament how he was utilized and the fact that he was, miscast for a number of years here, like every other team would have coming out. But the reality is that this roster isn't a 30-year-old pass rusher away. Now, that doesn't mean that if you go into the season and you're, 6-2 and that you are a pass rusher away, that you don't, make the move. But the reality is that I just don't think, with where they're going and how they're trying to get there, that you make this move right now. And yes, he would be an upgrade and perfect. And if you basically could guarantee that you're only going to have him on a 1-year deal and then you could go from there, I'm fine with that. But I just don't think getting him and then extending him, because that's what he wants. I mean,
yeah.
And understandably, I just don't think that's the move, because we're not talking about just a draft pick. We're not just talking about money. We're talking about all of it.
Yeah, so it would be, maybe one of their third-round picks.
Yeah, probably a third this year and a 4.
And then pay him, would a 3-year deal, or would they have to do a pretend fourth, like not even a void year, but call it 4 years, $80 million?
Yeah, right, exactly. And yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, is you're trying to reset this roster and everything. And again, fantastic, perfect fit, exactly what they need. Just, like you said, it's probably 2 years too late, unfortunately.
Right. When the Eagles got him, that would have been perfect. And I'm not saying, we've always, we're glad that Haason turned into the player that he did, but we also recognize that his particular skill set as a pass rusher has a finite amount of time that'll work because of his size. This is different than old John Abraham or old Dwight Freeney, because he's 6'1", short arms, and if he doesn't have that elite first step, he's not the same guy. He's just simply not going to be the same guy as a pass rusher. And I hope for his sake that doesn't happen. But with what we're watching the Cardinals do and try to build, is that what you want the Cardinals to bet on? Like they should have bet on him in 2020, and they didn't.
Well, no, quite frankly, they should have bet on him. I guess that was his 4th year, but yeah, they should have bet on him. They should have signed, if they knew they were going to make the move.
Traded Chandler. They should have traded Chandler and paid Haason.
Yeah, and just gone from there. But hindsight's obviously 2020. I think his best fit is going to a team, like Dallas or Green Bay, or a team that probably just is needs one pass rusher. Hell, like the Chiefs, right? Like you just add one more pass rusher, and that is able to extend him for the 2 years. And that, because I think yes, he probably helps the Cardinals reach the playoffs this year, ideally. But like the question you have then is, where is he at next year? Is he going to be a guy that can get you 13 sacks, or is he already down to 7.5, 8 sacks, and then year 3.
I will say, if you can bet on that, if even if he takes a step back, if a guy like B.J. Ojulari then takes a big step, because then he's still like year 2, but then year 3, when Haason's taken a step down, if Ojulari is a big time pass rusher, you're offsetting those costs essentially.
Yeah.
Because you're getting big production on a rookie contract while you're getting mediocre production on a giant contract.
Right.
But with that, who knows? And with that, we'll wrap up this edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Mr. of Cardinals Talk Web. It's episode 515. We'll be back in a couple days talking more off-season stuff. We'll finally delve into some more off-season topics. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in a couple of days.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.